So welcome everybody. My name is Kylie Stevenson. I'm a research fellow for the Centre for the Digital Child based at Edith Cowan University. We'll just start this. We'll be working through with 3 presenters. So if you could post your questions in the chat, and we'll have questions at the very end of all 3 presentations. So if you think of anything as you're progressing, feel free to pop it in the chat. So I'd like to start with an acknowledgement of the traditional custodians of the lands on which our students and our colleagues live and are educated. For me, that's the Whadjuk Noongar people of Western Australia, and we wish to acknowledge and show our respect for their elders past, present and emerging, for their continuing culture and the contributions they make to the life and learning of our communities, both now and in the past. And we acknowledge that these are lands that have never been ceded. So welcome everyone to this session called Children, Wellbeing and Digital Technologies. It's part of Children's Week, and the theme of Children's Week is all children have the right to a standard of living that supports their well-being and healthy development. And that feeds very nicely into the Centre for the Digital Child's focus on the educated child, the healthy child and the connected child. So we have 3 presenters today presenting on children, wellbeing and digital technologies. I'll introduce each at the beginning of their session. So, but just for your purposes, the order will be Associate Professor Lennie Barblett, followed by Professor Lisa Whitehead, and then Professor Lelia Green. So let me firstly introduce Associate Professor Lennie Barblett. So Lennie is the Chief Investigator for the Centre for the Digital Child and Associate Professor for Edith Cowan University's School of Education. In 2021, Lennie was made a member of the Order of Australia for her services to early childhood education and the tertiary sector. Lennie's going to present to us on a research project called Kindytxt that developed, delivered and evaluated a literacy text messaging program, Kindytxt, for parents, carers and carers of children attending kindergarten in 16 local government areas of Western Australia. This is a project that's in progress, so we will be stopping the recording for Lennie's session, but you are most welcome to post questions in the chat, and we will be coming back to Lennie with questions at the end of her session. So I'll hand over to Lennie now. Thank you.
Thanks, Kylie.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lennie. It's absolutely terrific. So we're going to move on quite quickly. As Lennie said, we want to leave enough time for questions at the end. So our next presenter is Professor Lisa Whitehead. Lisa is Professor of Nursing Research at ECU and Associate Dean of Research also. In 2021, Lisa was made a Fellow of the Australian College of Nursing in recognition of her significant professional experience in nursing education. So Lisa's presentation will explore the development and representation of the digital identity of children through data sourced from an online forum for families living with a child or children with type 1 diabetes. So I'll hand over to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Kylie. I'll just share my screen. Next slideshow. Okay. Great. So good evening, everyone, and thanks for joining us today for these presentations. So I'm going to be giving a presentation on the work that we're doing around digital identity of children aged 0 to 8 years. And this is work that's been undertaken as a core project within the Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child. I won't be able to present any data today because we're at the stage of collecting data and then moving on to analysis, but I'll be giving an overview of the project and the work and a little bit about why we're doing it. So we know that millions of people use social network sites for a range of purposes, including communication, education and socializing. And when we connect to the internet, we create a form of digital identity, whether we intend to or not. Sometimes these digital identities can be quite curated, they can be quite considered. Sometimes they are simply our digital footprint, the data representation that we leave behind. And digital identity has been described as how we view ourselves and represent our knowledge, experiences, and social connections. Now, of course, in the case of young children, parents all over the world are creating their children's digital identities, sometimes before the child even has a chance to develop one themselves. And parents are commonly sharing information about their children with their online contacts on social network sites. Many times the information shared is through multimedia content such as pictures and videos, or through status updates. And the information that parents share, of course, leave digital footprints for their child and contribute to their child's construction of online identity. So clearly this is a fascinating area, and so as a team we've started some work in the form of a scoping review and then a research project, which I'll move on to shortly. So we thought it was important to undertake a scoping review, first of all, to explore the extent of the knowledge that's out there on the concept of digital identity of children aged 0 to 8. And that's because as we were planning the research project, what we realised is that there are many different definitions of digital identity and a range of perspectives on what digital identity is. And within all populations, not just children, but adults as well. And so we're undertaking this scoping review at the moment to harness the evidence, if you like, not to come up necessarily with a definition, but to identify what's out there, what the range of definitions are, and potentially where the gaps are too. And so we've conducted a search of the literature. We found just over 1,500 items after the duplicates were removed that referred in some way to digital identity of children. After the title and abstract review, we excluded the majority of them and included 73 papers. And after the full text review, we now have 24 papers included. One of the major reasons why so many papers were excluded is because they were outside the age range of 0 to 8 years. There's definitely a predominance from from what we can see so far from our review, of predominance of papers that relate to older children, particularly adolescents, but not so much in relation to younger children. And so now we're just working through extracting the data for those 24 papers, extracting the findings that relate to the concept of digital identity of children. So we look forward to being able to report some more on that scoping review soon. The team are here as well. We've got a mix here in terms of our team, and a shout out to Evelot, because Evelot, I can see that you're online as well. So hello and thank you for joining. And then this is the core project that we're working on at the moment. This study has received ethics approval, and we're currently working with the Type 1 Family Diabetes Centre in Perth to extract the data from their Facebook page. So we're looking at the digital identity of children living with Type 1 diabetes in an online community for families. And the Type 1 Diabetes Centre set up their Facebook community back in 2017. And they have a number of channels on there, but one of them is specifically for parents to be able to post questions and information resources with other family members of children living with Type 1 diabetes. And they had a lot of foresight, I would say, and that when they set this up, they actually put in a clause to say that, this information may be used for research purposes, for the purpose of, better understanding and supporting families and children into the future. And they've been very keen and active partners, wanting to do a whole range of research with us in order to improve health outcomes for children with Type 1 diabetes. And this is one project that they've really come on board with us on. So I'd like to acknowledge Benjamin Jardine, who's the CEO of the Type 1 Family Diabetes Centre, and Diane Simmons works there too, who are being really supportive in terms of accessing the data and keeping involved in the project. So what are we going to do? Well, we're going to explore how digital identities are created for children in this online community for families. It is mostly parents, and in fairness, mostly mothers that post on this site, but not exclusively. We're going to focus on how children are represented in the online community through the posts of their family members. So the children themselves aren't able to directly log on. So family members will be posting on their behalf, if you like. We also want to understand a bit more about how children interact with the online community, if indeed they do interact with the online community, and the impact for them in terms of their identity creation and formation. And so these are the research questions that are guiding the study. We're wanting to explore how families are creating the channels of communication in the online community, how identities are created and formed, the involvement and interaction of the children, and how it impacts on the child's sense of identity. And the data analysis will involve two phases. So we're going to be drawing on netnography methodology. And netnography is a portmanteau, a combining of words, combining internet and network with ethnography. And netnography was originally developed in 1995 by Professor Robert Kozinets as a tool to analyse online discussions. And he's published actually hundreds of papers in this space now on the use of netnography, often in quite popularist areas, and marketing research as well. So we're going to undertake, first of all, a review of Facebook posts, and then we're going to undertake interviews with children and their families. So in phase 1, we'll analyse posts, so textual communication, audio, visual and photographic information posted by family members of children. And we'll analyse the data in 2 rounds. So in the first round, we're going to look at the most recent posts that are out there over a 3-month period. It's quite an active site. There are around sort of 20 or so posts a day on this site. So 3 months worth of posts will actually be quite a lot of posts, but we're going to analyse those posts first of all, just to work out what kind of posts we have, whether we can see any trends in the data, any patterns, and any areas that post analysis we feel need further exploration. And then in the second round, we'll extend this work with the potential to go all the way back to the start, back to 2017, maybe for selected posts, selected posters, or potential themes that we want to explore in more detail based on the phase 1 analysis or round 1 analysis. And then in phase 2, we intend to undertake interviews with families, and that includes the children, to explore the phase 1 findings. So we really want to be able to talk to them about the meaning of the post, the creation of identity, and the impact on the family as well. So we'll speak to the children as well as the family members to explore their understanding and their position on digital identity creation and formation. We think that will give us some really good insight into the data and the findings from the Facebook posts that we'll be analysing. And we'll also be fairly unique, probably as well, in terms of speaking to families and including children in those interviews as well around digital identity. So just to wrap up then, our timeline is, as I said, we've got ethics approval, and we're hoping that the data will be coming through to us very soon in the next couple of weeks. So we're intending to actually be able to complete the study in the first quarter of 2023. So hopefully by this time next year, we'll be able to present some findings from the study and the review as well. So thanks everyone, and look forward to your questions at the end.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm trying to get my camera back on. Terrific. That's a really exciting project in the Healthy Child area. So our next presenter is Professor Lilia Green. Lilia is Professor of Communications at Edith Cowan University, and in 2020 was one of the Foundation Chief Investigators for the Centre for the Digital Child, and part of the process of the winning bid for the centre. Lilia has had 13 Australian Research Council grants, and has conducted research with the EU and many international universities about the digital child. So I will hand over to Lilia. Thank you.
Thank you, Kylie. And hello, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully you can see that now. Great. So the topic of my project, and it's a project that's been going on since 2015. You'll see that it has a huge list of people to whom I owe a huge debt for this presentation, including Kylie, who worked on 2 out of 3 of the projects and who is a co-author with me of the book that's going to result from it. So we're looking at very young children's socio-emotional exploration and identity work online. And I'm just panicking because I haven't been able to change the slide. Okay, so this is the theme of Children's Week, and I know we've heard that before, so I'll move on. And I'd like to start by saying it's not self-evident in the discourse in the public sphere that children are actually supported in their health and well-being by, I'm talking very young children here, under 6, by engaging online. But that's in the public sphere. When you actually start talking to parents, parents come up with all sorts of exceptions and all sorts of benefits that they see as justifying the fact that they do allow their child to play with digital media, but it doesn't stop them feeling techno guilt. And I'll be talking about parents with children as young as 12 months. And one of the ways in which parents find their way forward when they have these circumstances where some experts are telling them one thing and they're deciding to do another is through learning by doing and through discussing that with other parents indeed. And so they do still draw upon experts, but they choose the ideas that they draw upon. So if they feel that they're going to reject the rule that there shouldn't be, or with the rule of thumb that children should only have very limited internet engagement under 2, and then not more than a certain amount, they start looking for other sources that they feel are more in tune with their particular perspectives. And in doing this, they reflect not only their own attitude to parenting, but also what they see as their child's personality and circumstances. So we've interviewed a number of parents who have different rules for different children because of children's different personalities and different interests. And when asked, parents will explain how their young child's digital media use supports their well-being and socio-emotional development. They discuss these features in 8 different areas, and I'm going to give an example of parental views in each of these from the different families that we interviewed at significant length, it must be said. And the researchers also engaged with the children. So even in the pre-verbal child, we invited them to participate by putting, for example, flashcards of an iPad or a television or a mobile phone into one of 3 circles that said, yes, I really like this, I'm neutral, or I don't like it. And so we managed to collect data from children's agentic behavior all the way through. So one of the first things is agency. And children learn self-awareness and that they have the power to impact the world from their digital media use, even at a very young age. There's a sense of connection, and we'll be talking a little bit about that, connecting with others. There's coordination. So people talk about the hand-eye coordination, the fine motor skills. And as they develop their ability to do touch and swipe and such like, they gain self-confidence. In the same way that they develop confidence around their coordination skills, it gives them a great thrill when they're able to do things like make a picture bigger or choose their favorite video on YouTube. And then there's the interpersonal skills, the fact that almost all children under 5 have to negotiate with somebody else to be able to use digital media. And this involves all sorts of incidental discussion and sometimes explanations about what they want to use it for. And sometimes things like baby likes it too. So there's a lot of, sort of putting themselves in another person's position as trying to strengthen an argument. There's the sense of shared cultural content, not only for children that come from non-English speaking background and can have direct links to a major source of media in their mother tongue, but also in terms of using a shared cultural content to cross cultural and language barriers. And we'll talk a bit about that in a moment. There's the issue of self-regulation, and a lot of parents would raise their eyebrows because they see digital media as an area in which children tend to learn late and learn hard to be careful. And indeed, many parents say that they have problems with their own self-regulation of digital media. But in fact, we have found examples of people who have strategies for helping children to learn patience. And then finally, in the older section of the 0 to 5 age group, there's identity exploration, and we'll look at that in a moment. So I'll be looking at an example for each of these categories. So Julia is a 12-month-old infant, and her mom, Jenna, explains how she absolutely loves remote controls at the moment to use for the digital TV. But she soon works out whether she's been given the toy one or if someone takes the batteries out, because it doesn't have any effect. And this isn't the only family where they say that what happens is they press the button, the child presses the button, she gets a response, and then she goes away. She doesn't actually want to watch the television. She wants to impact her world, and she gets huge satisfaction from doing so. So right at this very, very early stage, whether the child is touching a screen and getting a picture to come to life, or whether they're turning on a remote control, they experience the power of agency. And through what they choose, they begin to develop a sense of self. In terms of connection, we can look at this in terms of co-present and in remote connection, where you can see how people talk to each other, both in terms of explaining how to use the media or in doing things with it, playing with it. And we've got an example here from Jerry, who says, whenever he puts the selfie recording sign on his phone, his son automatically begins to make faces. And then he says, and this is something that they can then laugh about later because he plays it back and both of them find it funny. And in fact, in other families, they then use those videos to send to grandparents in other countries or even just in other suburbs. There's coordination, the issue of the fine motor skills. And so Mirabello talked to us about Leopoldo, who from a very few months old was using apps. Now, she said that she also read him books, but Leopoldo, who comes from a non-English speaking background, really found it easier to relate to images and music. And at the time that he first started, he couldn't close his hand, let alone point with one finger. But she goes on to say he can now use touchscreen technology really, really well, and talks about the benefits in terms of motivating and rewarding hand-eye coordination. So this hand-eye coordination is part and parcel, but a separate item from technological skill. And a lot of parents would tell us that they were just amazed at what their children could do. I didn't even know there was a YouTube app on my mum's phone, says the mother of Lavinia. And she found it and she opened it up and watched it. Now, in fact, when parents told us that they didn't help their child had just naturally managed some of these things, we sometimes were able to go back and watch the parent-child interacting, and we often saw the child just hand the phone or the tablet back to the parent when they got stuck, and without thinking, the parent would help them negotiate that barrier and hand it back. So in fact, there's a lot of implicit teaching going on that the parents don't necessarily recognize when they start talking about the innate understanding that children have for digital media. But the thing is that children often don't, are often just are so motivated to move through that they're not roadblocked by difficulties. Now, negotiation. We decided to use this slide to put this a little bit on its head. So we're used to parents setting limits around how long or how often children get screen time. But this is a mother, Kate, who has a 2-year-old called Scott and 2 older sons, Liam and Ben. And she was talking about Liam and Ben in particular, saying that they now feel they have a right to have screen time every day. And what you've got there is you've got the outworking of a negotiation that's been going on at a family level that says, well, okay, Mum, if you're going to tell us only once a day, then we want to say, at least give us that one time a day, and we're going to be miserable if you don't give us that opportunity. So I think that that's something where we can see the negotiation acting, and also children believing that they're developing an understanding around rights and entitlements and what's fair. And that's something else that comes up through the negotiations around digital media use. So back to Lavinia, who we heard a little quote from her mum earlier. And she comes from a non-English speaking background. And Lavinia's mum is imagining when Lavinia will goes to kindy or pre-kindy. And so she's heard other people say that you shouldn't just let children watch videos, but she can see a reason why children should be watching videos. She says that when Lavinia's in those educational settings and other kids are talking about things like Peppa Pig or Bluey, she wants Lavinia to know about it too. I don't want, she feel, lonely, and then there's no socializing with the other kids. So that shared cultural content around the popular children's content like the Wiggles or Peppa Pig or Bluey is something that children can use to explore affinities with each other and an understanding of a shared background, even where there are cultural and other differences. So the self-regulation, and as I say, we do acknowledge, and many parents share with us their tech tantrums and the challenge posed by those. But there's this lovely example as well of an under 2-year-old who has now come to understand the concept of charging the iPhone and charging the battery. And so this is someone who is not from an incredibly well-off family and who doesn't necessarily have more than one device. So as one needs charging, you move on to the other. That he can now be used. He can now have that example used to say that. So his mother says that if he's been breastfeeding a lot during the day, and at 23 months, of course, some parents still are breastfeeding as a matter of choice and to give kids a really great start, I will tell him the milk needs to charge. And at that point, he stops fussing and just waits for it. Comes back to it later, as he would do with a phone. And then one of the older children in our group, a young girl called Leela, and she's got an older sibling called Marissa. And we do know that children are particularly immersed in their family and their family communication culture in terms of their digital media use. So Marissa starts playing with Leela over the Snapchat app. And Snapchat is something that often even parents of older children might get a little concerned about because there's been a lot of negative publicity. But Linda is very comfortable with this, and Marissa, I gather, also talks to Leela about safety and all of those sorts of things. But what they're doing is they were just starting taking selfies together. So Leela is now talking to one of the researchers in Direct, and she starts saying, look, I can make all different ones. And she starts adding purple lipstick and purple eye makeup, and then she puts some jewelry, a ring through her nose, on the actual selfie. So what you're getting there is someone who's playing with self-presentation, who's developing identity and a taste repertoire in terms of how she sees herself growing up in the future. And so this is something that's very important. And we know that this is particularly important, this sense of having a sense of identity and having a community that you can belong to with older teenagers, particularly teenagers who identify as gender diverse or with very minority interests, who may not otherwise have people in their immediate environment whom they can share their hopes, fears and dreams with. So in summary, I'd like to say that children's engagement with interactive digital media is conditioned and enabled by parents, that infants are enfranchised via touch and swipe. Toddlers allows them to practice negotiation, sharing and differentiating me from you, and preschoolers who increasingly express individuality and make choices that explore personality and identity. I'd like to acknowledge the three Australian Research Council sources of funding that have helped inform this. The people who've been working with me on the Centre of Excellence core project on this area, and their names are listed there. First time parents' plans for their children's digital futures. The Internet of Toys, as you can see, it's almost as long as a credit on a movie, and the Toddlers and Tablets. And Kylie was on both of those last two and has been invaluable. And she's also a co-author with me of the forthcoming book, Digital Media Use in Early Childhood, Birth to 6. And that's me. And thank you very much. I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Lilia. That was so interesting. I just realized I forgot to introduce your session, about what your session was. So I apologize for that. So we've got a few questions in the chat. So we'll start with those and then we'll open it up to questions from other people, but feel free to add your question to the chat if you wish to. So we'll start with Naomi, who posed a question to Lennie about examples of the Kindytxt.
Thanks, Kylie, and thanks, Naomi, for the question. Yes, so if anyone does know Marie Claire's concepts of print, then some of the categories we covered were definitely relationship based and enjoyment, text level, directionality, sound awareness. So I'm going to give you one from the text level. So the activity was something, and it was the key concept was asking questions, because that's important when you're reading books with children. So the activity comes in on the Friday night and says, after reading a book with your child, ask questions about the story. Ask, what was the story about? What happened in the story? That's Friday. Saturday comes some information. Asking questions before, during, and after reading helps your child to understand the story. And then on Sunday night, a little bit more to do, some thinking around how to extend. So after reading a book with your child, ask questions about the story. Ask, what did you like? Why did you like this? So very, very simple, and just followed a pattern like that. But again, great to see that it was successful. Parents liked it. And as again, easy, it's on your phone. You can have it there while you're reading. So thanks for the question. Thanks, Kylie.
We might just jump to Esther's question about Kindytxt because it's related. How did you get it right for parents, not making it too little or too much?
Yes, great question, Esther. And of course, it was a pilot, so we weren't to know until we had a go. So Caroline Barrett-Pugh and I, we were the first writers of the texts. We're both very experienced educators. And then we worked with some fantastic teachers and librarians. So the other part of the project was this partnership framework. So these teachers and librarians came in to 3 days of workshops with us. So we certainly put our first draft down and they went, nah, yeah, nah. That was good. And then on top of that, we had a great transdisciplinary expert group made up of the systems and sectors and our funders. And they had another go, and very wise counsel, the people in that, some absolutely amazing literacy academics that we've worked with over the years. and they had another run. So lots of red pens out. And then all we could do was have a go at it. And so that's what we've done. So we think, as I said, some parents dropped out after the first couple of weeks because they thought it was too simple when they got their 3 questions to ask. And so we would next time just make sure that everyone understands we're going from simple to complex so they stay with it. Hope that helps.
Thanks, Lennie. Now, in interest of time, I'm going to crunch 2 questions together. So one's from Esther and one's from Sue Cranmer. And these are for Lisa. So Lisa, why birth to 8? Why Facebook? And why children with type 1 diabetes?
Yeah. So why 0 to 8? Well, 0 to 8 is the focus for the Centre of Excellence for the Digital Child. So they're not my my years of choice necessarily, but linked with the Centre for Excellence. And I'll just throw to Lilia if I can. Lilia, we were talking about this not long ago actually in relation to the scoping review, weren't we? And exploring why 0 to 8 in terms of the application for the centre in the first place.
Sure. My understanding, without being an early childhood educator, is that that's the remit for early childhood education. So early childhood education as a disciplinary focus goes from birth, and it works with both parents and the wider family and community, but also with teachers and with the connections between parents, teachers, and the community. So it's a very holistic view of children, as one would hope in that age group, before it moves into areas of specialization with, language, maths, sort of writing, maths, and so forth. And it's looking at the child as a whole in their context and supporting the rounded development of them. But of course, Lennie would be the expert on that rather than me.
I'll just add, it's the international definition of early childhood is birth to 8. So that's when we talk early childhood, that's what we mean.
Yep, and then the other 2 parts, why Facebook and why type 1 diabetes. So this, of course, in large part comes down to our industry partnering with the Type 1 Family Diabetes Centre. And so that really informs those 2 parts. But also, I think, beyond that, although Facebook isn't the only social media, of course, there are many other forms of social media. But it is one of the major forms of social media in terms of community groups and how they talk to one another, share information. The Family Centre don't use other forms of social media. If they did, obviously, we'd be looking at those too. But that's what we have to work with, I think, at the moment. But also, I'm quite pleased with that. I think it's very representative of how many groups connect with one another. And the type 1 and diabetes, again, it's in relation to our industry partner, but of course type 1 diabetes represents a chronic disease that's experienced by children, including very young children, as is now unfortunately pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes as well increasingly. But type 1 diabetes is a chronic condition that can have a huge impact on children and families as well, and is a relatively common disease, more common than many of the rare genetic conditions, of course, that potentially we could have focused on for this age group. Yeah, I hope that's answered your questions.
Thanks, Lisa. And we've got a question, very simple question, but not so simple perhaps, to Lilia. When will your book, Digital Media Use in Early Childhood, be released? Which we were just speaking about today.
That's right. Look, it's currently with the publisher. It was a few thousand words over, and I think that the feedback seems very positive, and we're hoping the first half of next year. But I suppose it's just possible that we'll be asked to revise little aspects of it to bring it down. We so loved working with the families we had, the 18 Australian families and the 12 British families, that it is 10% longer than it should be. So you know how strict we are with our students, and unfortunately we were slightly more indulgent with ourselves.
Great. So I'd like to open it up now to people to ask a question. Feel free to turn your camera on and your microphone on, and rather than put a question in the chat, would you like to pose a question to these three fabulous presenters yourself? So I'll jump in with a question for each of you, if you like. I guess I'd like to ask how you have fit your research into the Centre for the Digital Child itself, and made sense of your own research in relation to the Centre for the Digital Child's aims as a holistic, a centre researching a holistic child experience.
I might start because my project's not a digital, didn't start out as, we started this before we became part of the Digital Child. And I think it's a really good question, Kylie, because for me, it probably reinforced what I already knew. That is that families are looking for strategies, techniques, and tools to help their children with early literacy. Some families still don't have access to books, printed, written materials, but they might have access to a phone. So I think anything we can do in this multimodal way of learning, I think for me, really was hit home in this project. So for me, as you say, it is, and because we were building a partnership framework around this digital texting program, that ecological nesting of the child within the family, within the community, and the connections that we have to community services and schools. And this is why this week's Early Learning Matters theme is so important around how we build children's capacity for their early learning and development. But it's how we help families, I think, too, support that and empower that is really, really hit home to me in this study that I'll take forward into the Digital Child.
I think for me, it did require quite a bit of thinking at the start in terms of how a project would link well with the centre, because the remit was not to necessarily, although health is one of the three key areas, it wasn't necessarily to come from a perspective of health and first. It was more to come from the digital child angle and explore elements of health within that. And so what I always think about in terms of planning this particular project was around putting my sociological hat back on and thinking from a sociological perspective about digital and children and families and impact. And that's really how this project came to being, in order to link all of the areas together.
Thank you. So I'll go last. So the thing is that this project, the project we're doing about first-time parents' plans for their children's digital future, is really a response to see how parents approach this. And although we do find that most parents have a just-in-time learning, I suppose what's different about the research we've been doing really all the way through for the last decade or so, ever since we were fortunate enough to be part of the EU Kids Online study, is we've taken parents as the experts in parenting, rather than positioning outsiders and specialists as being the experts. So rather than balance, so rather than countermanding, rather than ignoring parents' perspectives and telling them what they should be doing, we ask them what they do, why they do it, and what benefits they see from doing that. Because parents, in our experience, always set out to do the best possible job in the circumstances they encounter. And I think once we start seeing it from that point of view, and then you can start talking to them about at their reactions to some of the advice that they are beginning to ignore, and the confidence they have in their own relationship with their child. And so it always frustrates me when I see people saying, oh, you should know all about all of the various apps before you allow your child to go on it, because it sets parents up to fail. They can't learn all about all of the apps. However, the only thing they really need to be expert in is their child, because that's the connection that will will serve the child to keep them safe through negative experiences in other contexts. So I think we're very fortunate in the methodology we use and the history of the research we've done in setting up that respect for parents and for the knowledge and the day in, day out, hour in, hour out love and care that they show their children.
Thank you. So that brings us to the end of this session on children wellbeing and digital technologies, and a very nice ending, bringing that together. There's some lovely thank yous in the comments. We know that it's 9:30 p.m. in many parts of Australia, 8:30 in Queensland, and just 6:30 in Western Australia, but still that's peak parenting time for many people. So can I thank everyone who's participated today? And can I also ask you to thank our three presenters, Lennie Barblett, Lisa Whitehead, and Lilia Green, for sharing their expertise today. So thank you.
But thank you too to Kylie for chairing, because the three of us know that she stepped into this with less than an hour's notice. So thank you. It was very brilliantly done.
Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.